Now, if any method in which the targeted musculature is overloaded is a recruitment method, any method in which the time under tension is enhanced can be used as a fatigue method. Now, some of the more traditional ways to do this are to perform as many reps as you can, rest as little as possible between efforts and sets, and slow down the rate at which you perform or execute your movements. Now, I'll talk about those three real quick so that you have a better understanding of why they work and why they fatigue and exhaust the muscle fibers. Now, performing as many reps as possible, if you use a light enough weight, obviously if you use a very heavy weight and you only get like 2 or 3 reps, and that's as many as possible, it's not gonna have the same effect as if you used a weight that allowed you to get 10, 12, 15, 20, 30 or whatever reps. Obviously, if the weight's too light, you'll be able to do more than 50 to 60 reps. At that point, you will be fatiguing the muscle fibers, but it's not likely that you will have recruited many along the way. Now, used exclusively, probably not an effective way to go, but if part of a broader system in which you used some of the more traditional recruitment methods, that could be an effective way. And the reason is because what happens is when the muscles are contracted for a sustained period of time and they have to do perform a lot of work per se, metabolic waste accumulates, and this causes an increase in local growth factors from within the muscle, and that in itself stimulates and promotes a growth response. As for resting as little as possible, you know, whether you use a moderate weight or a light weight, the time that you take between your sets can determine how much of that waste is removed. Now, the longer you rest, the more that waste is removed. The less that you rest, the more that it's going to build up, the more that it's going to accumulate, and the greater growth response it is going to promote. As for performing slower repetitions, when you perform a repetition, the amount of force that you exert or impart on the weight that you're trying to lift will determine how much more force is needed to complete the repetition. If you push a weight with as much force as possible, you'll maximize recruitment at precisely the time that you apply that amount of force. As that force is applied, depending on the amount of weight that you're using, momentum generated will carry the weight from not A to Z per se, but from maybe B to C to D to whenever the rep ends. So recruitment is maximized initially from A to B, but from B to whenever is actually suboptimal because the momentum generated has taken over and enabled you to complete the lift. By lifting slower, you eliminate that. You force the muscle to perform more work throughout the entire range of motion. And this in itself can limit the amount of oxygen that gets in and out of the muscle to remove the waste that accumulates. And that is what will promote a growth response. That is what will contribute to fatiguing as many muscle fibers as possible, along with limiting your rest and just performing as many reps as you can. Now, from there are 4 other ways that are all slightly related that can make training more fun and allow you to get the same effect of fatiguing as many muscle fibers as possible. And they're all variations of the same. Supersets and giant sets. By chaining together multiple exercises for the same body part, you are requiring the targeted musculature to do more work, and thus you are going to fatigue more of the muscle fibers. So supersets and giant sets. Now, the sequence in which you perform them can be used to enhance recruitment or fatigue of the targeted muscle. For example, a lot of people will have difficult time recruiting their chest on a bench press. They're either shoulder dominant or just they don't have the ability to voluntarily innervate the chest when performing the movement, and therefore the chest doesn't actually do all the work that they want it to do. So by performing a pre-exhaust superset, you would do an isolated movement for the chest, and you can even implement some of the techniques that I just discussed to enhance recruitment of the pecs. So you could do a pec deck or a dumbbell fly slow for a lot of reps with a little bit of rest in between, and that will exhaust the pecs, that will fatigue them, that will recruit them as well. And then when you move on to a bench press, the reason for failure will be because the targeted musculature, in this case being the pecs, is too exhausted to continue. Whereas under traditional circumstances, it would be that the chest could continue to exert force, but assisting muscle groups like the shoulders and the triceps are just too fatigued to do so. So pre-exhaust superset kind of can be used strategically to combat that. On the other end of the spectrum, if you do have an easy time recruiting the targeted musculature, to extend a set but use a heavier weight initially to recruit more of the targeted muscles, you would use a post-exhaust superset. So just completely reverse. You do your bench press first because you are strong neurologically and you can recruit the pecs at will, and then you continue to fatigue them afterwards by performing an isolated movement. And you can implement any of the techniques discussed previously into that type of set as well. From there, supersets and giant sets can really be any exercises that you want. It doesn't matter if it's compound or isolation. That's up to you. So you have some free will there. And then finally, one of my favorite methods to both recruit and fatigue a muscle fiber is what's called a mechanical drop set. And I see a lot of people on YouTube doing their own variations of the mechanical drop set. And what a mechanical drop set is a set that begins with an exercise designed to target a specific muscle group in a position of disadvantage. And when you can no longer perform any more reps in that position of disadvantage, you switch to a more advantageous position to extend your set. So an example would be going from an underhand to an overhand with a bench press. You're obviously weaker with an underhand grip. You target different muscles of the pec as well because of where your elbows, the trajectory of your elbows during the movement. But generally you'd still do it for the pecs. And when you fatigue and you fail because of the position of disadvantage, you switch to a more advantageous position, being an overhand position, and you continue your set from there. And that's the fourth and final way of those 4 ways that you can use to exhaust and fatigue as many muscle fibers as possible. So a quick review: performing as many reps as you can, resting as little as possible, performing slow repetitions, supersets, pre-exhaust, post-exhaust, and mechanical drop sets. Those are the 7 ways, probably the most effective, that you'll find to fatigue and exhaust as many muscle fibers as possible.